Hello, Trailblazer fans, Blazers Edge readers. Welcome to our first postseason edition of the Blazers Edge Videocast. I'm Sam Tung here, along with Dave Deckard, talking about really one of the hot topics, Dave, not only on Blazers Edge, but league-wide. And the topic is Kevin Love and his reported want and desire to get out of Minnesota. And so we wanted to at least have a little debate here on the video cast talking about Kevin Love versus LaMarcus Aldridge. Would you be interested in making that type of deal? We also want to make sure, though, that you all know, if you're watching the video and you haven't seen the topic yet already, Dave wrote some about this. We wanted to expand on it here, but there's also going to be on that other post, there is a place where you can actually vote on which side you fall on. So Dave, the question goes to you: is there any circumstance in which you would make a trade mainly consisting of LaMarcus Aldridge and Kevin Love? Obviously, there would need to be some other things exchanged, but the bulk of it, would you make the exchange, or what is the argument for the exchange of Love for Aldridge?
Well, you wouldn't actually have to. One of the arguments for it is that you could trade them straight up. Their salaries are almost identical. So Minnesota will not probably get a lot better offers star-wise than Aldridge. People are going to try to lowball him, I think, and they'll have to at least look at that. Aldridge and Love obviously both play power forward, and so there wouldn't be a lot of pain there in terms of transition. So it would work as far as the basic criteria went of easing a trade along. Whether you'd actually do it, that's very, very unlikely, but I can think of some arguments for the Blazers at least looking at that deal. Number one is that Love has more range than Aldridge, but can play a similar game to him stylistically, in that he can spread the floor a little bit, he can go a little bit inside out, but he can go as far out as the three-point line, which does a couple things. First of all, it fits right into Portland's offensive thrust, and second of all, it frees up the need for maybe some other player in the starting lineup to have to be a three-point shooter, because right now you have to have those shooters on the floor in order to spread it. If your power forward becomes one of those spread players as well, you begin to look at the possibility of having a shooting guard, for instance, who could drive or post up or something like that without gumming up the lane. Also, man, Kevin Love, I don't know if you've looked at him statistically, Sam, but he is just a phenom. Offensively, he's marginally better than Aldridge in almost every category, but his true shooting percentage is through the roof. Obviously, his three-point percentage is a lot better. His scoring is better. There are a lot of things statistically that Love just does better than Aldridge.
Well, you're right. I mean, statistically, and I'm looking at it now, Love averages 26 points a game, just a hair under 13 rebounds a game, which is pretty impressive. A PER, Dave, of 27, which is very high. However, on the other side, and really the side that I think makes the most sense for LaMarcus statistically, the 23%, the 23 points a game, the 11 rebounds a game. But I do think that statistically, I understand the argument for Love, but I really do believe that statistically, Love is a better player, but I think in terms of actual impact on the floor, LaMarcus is the better guy because he's a guy that, he's been the focal point of an offense. I'm not saying that Love hasn't, but Aldridge has had much more success in that, and we've seen that over the last couple of years. Kevin Love has never made it to the playoffs, and LaMarcus Aldridge has. And I do think that there is something to be said for a guy that can put up very high statistical numbers, doesn't necessarily make him the guy. And I think that with either one of these players, you're going to be paying them as if they are the guy. And I don't necessarily believe that Love can be the focal point of a team. I think that he can be one of a couple, but you could take Damian Lillard off of this Blazer team, and the Trailblazers are going to still be, a very good team. And you could almost see that when LaMarcus was hurt for much of the year, the team really suffered during that. So I think in terms of actual impact on the game, I think that LaMarcus is that guy. And not only that, I just think back to the playoffs, Dave, especially against Houston when LaMarcus was putting up unbelievable numbers, Kevin Love-like numbers, and I think that he really matched him in that statistical way. But you just, in terms of overall impact, I think that if LaMarcus has a 25 and 15 game, I really think that the overall, the overall positive output that he had is greater than if Kevin Love has similar statistics.
Yeah, but I wonder if we aren't being colored a little bit by the playoffs. I mean, I empathize with what you just said, obviously, being a Blazers fan, but the question is, dogged LaMarcus throughout his career, can he lead an offense? Can he be that number one guy on a successful team? And he did show that this year, but before that, that was an open question, just like it's an open question for Love now. If you take Love and stick him on the current Portland Trailblazers squad, who knows? He might be able to be that number one guy as well. I think, the question is Love enough of an improvement over Aldridge in order to justify that move? I am not entirely convinced that that is so, but I don't think you can dismiss it offhand. I don't think you can look at these two players and say there's no way Kevin Love could function on this team or maybe even make it better. Offensively, anyway, on the offensive end, defensive rebounding at least, and maybe even on the offensive glass, I think Love can make as big of an impact as Aldridge, if not bigger, again, by virtue of spreading that floor and moving the ball, I think, better even than Aldridge does.
Well, I think, I don't think anyone's dismissing it offhand. That's the reason that we're having this discussion in the first place. B, I think the argument of Kevin Love being able to stretch the floor, that is true to the three-point line, but LaMarcus does stretch the floor. He does have an elite mid-range game. That is his bread and butter. And so I really do think that LaMarcus, while he may not stretch it as much as Love does, I do think that he does it enough to where the defense does have to make a pretty big adjustment. I mean, we even saw it against Houston. They had to go out with their best defensive player, which was Dwight Howard, and guard him. Otherwise, they were going to get toasted on the inside. He did struggle against Thiago Splitter, but as you know, I think that a lot of what we've seen in this playoffs is that he's probably a much more underrated defender than we give him credit for. But I do think overall, on both sides of the ball, I think LaMarcus is a much better defender than Love is. He's a great rebounder. If you want to put the two together, Kevin Love is absolutely, he's really the elite rebounder in the NBA, especially after Dwight Howard took a step back here in these last couple of years. So Love is the best rebounder in the NBA. However, as I said before, the overall impact, and I do think that you have to take the playoffs into account, because that was the biggest stage. That was for the organization, that first round, it might have not necessarily been like winning a championship, but for as long of a drought as they had, it was certainly a huge impact on the organization, and LaMarcus took it upon himself to do that, and yet Kevin Love still has yet to make the playoffs, whether he was a featured player or not, and I do think that that is something that you need to take into consideration.
Okay, but then don't you have to take the whole playoffs into consideration? I mean, Aldridge got stymied against the Spurs, and imagine if the Blazers instead could take some of those Spurs defenders out as far as that arc. Then Thiago Splitter doesn't look so good anymore, and then he's way far away from the rim, leaving Robin Lopez in single coverage to grab offensive rebounds, and I like that matchup against almost anybody in the NBA. There are wrinkles that Love can throw in that Aldridge just can't. As a matter of fact, I was looking at Aldridge's stats the other day, and it shocked me. He is good when he's out shooting that turnaround kind of fadeaway from 16 feet or so. And he is good when he is right at the cup dunking it, but he is really not very good at all anywhere in between there, nor obviously beyond his normal post-up range. So to me, Aldridge, yes, he was great, but he's great in certain ways, in a couple of limited ways on offense that he really makes the most of, the same way Robin Lopez is great in a couple limited ways, and Wes Matthews is great in a couple limited ways, and Nick Batum is great in a couple limited ways. Damian Lillard is really your only multi-pronged threat that's really consistent and has a lot of options. You know, Love may not be the greatest mix-it-up offensive player. Carmelo Anthony is better, although he doesn't drive as much anymore, but he has the ability to score from literally anywhere. You know, Love is better than Aldridge in terms of his variety of offense anyway. And, you know, do you make that trade? I think you have to say probably not, but you at least have to acknowledge that it's a possibility, don't you?
Yeah, I think that, well, acknowledge that it's a possibility. No, I don't think that there's a reasonable possibility of it happening. If it were to knock on your door for you to just completely dismiss it, I don't think that would be it. I don't think that you could completely dismiss it. But I understand the idea. But I think just in terms of, and that's not to say that, here's the other thing too, Dave. You mentioned that Love is a better matchup against the Spurs. The Trailblazers do not beat Houston in the first round to meet the Spurs if it isn't for LaMarcus Aldridge. And I really think though I think that there's something that's a big part of it. But do you dismiss it? I mean, I'm curious what you think, but I don't think you can, especially both of these guys are elite players. You know, they're really mentioned in those two, and Blake Griffin are kind of mentioned in that top 3 power forwards in the NBA right now. And I think that a lot of it does come down to fit too. You know, if the Trailblazers move in a different direction, and Kevin Love, if he were on the market and maybe would be a better fit for what they're trying to do, then I do think that it might make more sense. If Damian Lillard in the next 2 or 3 years becomes the featured player, and there might not be enough touches for him and LaMarcus, then I think that you have to start thinking about something like that. But I think as of today, if you take the status quo and everything that's happened over the last couple of weeks and last couple of months, Aldridge, you can't do that deal. But I mean, do you think that that's something that they also have to think about?
Well, what I wonder is, what if Minnesota gets their backs against the wall and has to sweeten it to get any superstar? I mean, literally, when I looked over the list of people they could possibly be offered that made any sense, New York has nothing. The Lakers have nothing, and that's, you know, the 2 places I think where Love would love to go, and they'd love to have him. That just doesn't seem like a possibility at all. Because I don't think if you're Minnesota you can start over for just draft picks either. I think you're far enough along in this process. You can't completely rebuild again. So you start looking at guys like David Lee, Chris Bosh maybe, but Bosh is getting a little long in the tooth at this point. You know, Aldridge is a pretty good option. I'm not sure that they will get better than that offer. What if their backs were against the wall and they had the incentive to sweeten it a little bit? Now, the post we did on Blazers Edge is not going to happen. We posited an exchange of draft picks, next year's Portland first rounder for this year's Minnesota lottery pick. That's not going to happen. But what if they threw in one player who could play off the bench? So the Blazers got one guy deeper, and Minnesota didn't necessarily care about losing that extra guy. So you get your starting power forward, and you get slightly deeper on the bench in a way that's going to be difficult to do this summer. Would that change the tone at all? I wonder.
And not only that, Dave, I think that LaMarcus can have a greater impact as an individual than Kevin Love can. Like, if you were to swap those 2 guys, I think that Minnesota would probably rather at this point have Aldridge, because he's a guy that is more capable of getting his own shot. He's a guy that, you know, he makes an impact on the defensive end, or at least he has over the last year, albeit fairly inconsistently, but compared to Kevin Love, who's just not an athletic player, that's not his game. I really do think, though, that would make a lot of sense. And one thing that you didn't bring up with Kevin Love, everyone talks about the outlet passes, but it's one thing to be mentioned is Terry Stotts. He has this extension, and he wants to run. He wants to go. And Kevin Love, I think, really does fit well into that. You know, maybe not necessarily as a guy like Aldridge that can run the floor well, but a guy start the offense. But I think right now, if LaMarcus Aldridge and Kevin Love are switched for this past season, I do think that the Timberwolves are a better basketball team, because I think that Aldridge fits in as a better player in the star role than Kevin Love would. But as you said, you can make a fairly good argument that Love, in a situation where he's with other star players, can probably be, his skill set can be highlighted to where the flaws in his game don't necessarily have to be magnified. And I think that really the greatest parts of his game, the part of his game where he excels, is when he doesn't, is his rebounding is a big part of it, and his range that you give him. As you said, he's not a one-on-one isolation type player, which Aldridge, has been effective at in the past.
Right, and maybe Damian Lillard could take that over. So, I think I'm in agreement with you. I don't do that trade one-on-one, but I want to know, at least, if I get called by Flip Saunders, what else will you offer me in order to make this happen? And if that piece is semi-significant, I at least have to go to my owner and my coach and sit down and say, hey, let's at least think about this and do our due diligence on it. It's not an automatic no. You have to think about how this team can grow going forward. And, hey, there are worse things in the world than to have Kevin Love on your team.
Do you bring back the Lake Oswego player here, Dave?
Yeah, well, he's a two-time loser now. Lake Oswego in Minnesota. He can't get much worse. So, I mean, Portland has got to be a relief after that, and he'll have enough money to live wherever he wants, so he can stay away from the LO and get out of the Minnesota snow. So, hey, it's a win-win for him.
Yeah, well, I'm sure Blazer fans would be thrilled to have a UCLA grad on the team. I bet that's going to be their favorite part of it. But anyways, again, if you haven't seen it already, not this post, but the one prior, we'll link to it in this post. Check out and vote whether or not you would do a deal. Weigh all the options, and then vote whether or not, or what it would take for you to do a deal like that. That's going to do it for us here on the Videocast today. For Dave Deckard, I'm Sam Tung. We will talk to you all in a couple days with some more off-season talk as we gear up here for the main part of the off season. So again, keep it here on BlazersEdge.com for all of that, and we will talk to you all soon.